The rain hammered against the windshield like angry fingers tapping on glass. Keanu Reeves squinted through the water streaming down, trying to see the road ahead. His 1969 Mustang had been running perfectly when he left Los Angeles 3 hours ago. Now it was making sounds that no car should ever make. The engine coughed once, twice, then died completely. The car rolled to a stop on the side of the empty highway. Keanu sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain pound on the roof. He was somewhere between Los Angeles and nowhere, on a road he had never traveled before. The darkness outside was complete, except for his headlights cutting through the rain. He pulled out his phone. No signal, of course. He tried the engine. Again, nothing, not even a click. The headlights were already growing dim. Soon he would be sitting in complete darkness on an empty road in the middle of a storm. Keanu grabbed his jacket from the back seat and stepped out into the rain. The water soaked through his clothes in seconds. He was instantly cold and miserable. He looked up and down the highway, hoping to see headlights coming his way. Nothing, just rain and darkness and the sound of water running off the asphalt. He started walking. His shoes splashed through puddles that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The rain was coming down so hard he could barely see 10 feet ahead. Every few minutes he would stop and listen for cars, but the only sound was rain hitting leaves and pavement. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he saw something glowing in the distance. A soft red light that flickered, like a candle in the wind. As he got closer, he could make out the shape of a building. Then he could read the sign, Pete's Auto Repair, open late. The building was small and looked like it had been there forever. Paint was peeling from the walls, and the roof sagged in places. But light was coming from inside, and that was the most beautiful thing Keanu had seen all night. He walked up to the front door and knocked. Through the glass, he could see an old man bent over a workbench. The man looked up, saw Keanu standing in the rain, and hurried to open the door. "Good Lord, son, you look like a drowned cat," the old man said. "Get in here before you catch your death." Keanu stepped inside, dripping water on the floor. The garage was warm and smelled like motor oil and coffee. Tools hung on every wall, organized with the care of someone who had spent a lifetime working with his hands. "I'm Pete Garrison," the old man said, extending a hand that was rough with calluses but gentle in its grip. "What brings you out on a night like this?" "My car broke down about a mile back," Keanu said. "I'm Keanu Reeves." Pete nodded as if famous names were just another part of his daily routine. "Well, Keanu, let's get you some coffee and dry clothes first. Then we can talk about your car." Pete disappeared into a back room and returned with a towel and an old flannel shirt. "This was my son's," he said quietly. "He's grown now, lives in Seattle, hasn't been back in years." Keanu changed into the dry shirt while Pete poured coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the morning. The coffee was strong and hot, and it warmed him from the inside out. "Now then," Pete said, settling into a chair that had seen better days, "tell me about this car of yours." Keanu described the sounds the engine had been making, the way it had died, and how it would not start again. Pete listened carefully, nodding at certain details, asking questions that showed he knew cars like most people knew their own names. "Sounds like your alternator gave up," Pete said finally. "Common problem with cars that age, especially in weather like this. The rain gets into places it shouldn't, and things start failing." "Can you fix it?" Keanu asked. Pete smiled. "Son, I've been fixing cars since before you were born. There's not much I can't handle. But we'll need to tow it here first. I've got a truck out back." They drove through the rain to where Keanu's Mustang sat dark and lifeless on the roadside. Pete backed his tow truck up to it with the skill of someone who had done this thousands of times. The old truck was loud and rough, but it pulled the Mustang back to the garage without any trouble. Inside the garage, Pete lifted the hood of the Mustang and began his examination. He moved around the engine like a doctor checking a patient, touching this, listening to that, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. "Yep, alternator's dead," he said after a few minutes. "But that's not all. Looks like your battery's on its last legs too, and there's some corrosion on the terminals. We'll need to clean that up." Pete worked steadily, his old hands moving with surprising speed and precision. He removed the dead alternator, cleaned the battery terminals, and began installing a replacement alternator that he pulled from his parts inventory. "You keep alternators for 1969 Mustangs just lying around?" Keanu asked. Pete chuckled. "I keep parts for everything just lying around. Never know when someone's going to need help. Besides, classic cars like this, they're worth saving. Not like the plastic toys they make nowadays." As Pete worked, he talked about cars he had fixed, places he had been, and the wife he had lost 3 years ago. Martha had been the love of his life, he said. She had believed in his dreams even when they seemed impossible. What kind of dreams? Keanu asked. Pete was quiet for a moment, focusing on a particularly stubborn bolt. "Oh, you know, old man's dreams. Probably sound foolish to someone like you. Try me." Pete looked up from the engine. "I used to think we'd make contact with life out there," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the ceiling. "Space, I mean. Other worlds. Other people. Martha and we used to sit on the porch at night and look at the stars, wondering if anyone was looking back." There was something in the old man's voice, a wistfulness that spoke of dreams deferred but not forgotten. "I don't think that sounds foolish at all," Keanu said. Pete smiled and returned to his work. 20 minutes later, the Mustang's engine roared to life. The sound was strong and healthy, better than it had sounded in months. "How much do I owe you?" Keanu asked, reaching for his wallet. Pete waved him away. "Nothing. Just helping a fellow traveler. Come on, you can't work for free." "Says who?" Pete wiped his hands on a rag that had seen decades of use. "Some things are more important than money, son. Like helping people when they need it." Keanu felt something stir in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee or the dry shirt. Here was a man who had opened his door to a stranger in a storm, worked late into the night, and asked for nothing in return. "Thank you," Keanu said, and meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. Pete just smiled and walked him to the door. "Drive safe now. And remember, there's always someone willing to help if you know where to look." Keanu drove away. Into the night, his car running perfectly. In his rearview mirror, he could see the light from Pete's garage growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. But something about that light, and the man who kept it burning, stayed with him long after he reached home. Pete Garrison stood in his garage long after the red taillights of the Mustang disappeared into the rain. The coffee cup in his hands had grown cold, but he barely noticed. Something about that young man had stirred memories he usually kept buried deep. He walked to the back of the garage and pulled aside a heavy canvas tarp. Underneath was a metal door that looked like it belonged on a submarine. Pete pressed his thumb against a small scanner, and the door opened with a soft hiss. He had installed the security system himself, using parts from 3 different companies, so no one could trace where it came from. The stairs leading down were narrow and steep. Pete had built them 20 years ago when his knees were stronger, and his back didn't ache every morning. Now each step reminded him that he was getting old, but he made the journey every night without fail. The basement was nothing like the garage above. Here, banks of computers hummed quietly in the dim light. Cables ran along the walls like veins, connecting machines that Pete had built with his own hands. In the center of the room stood his masterpiece, a device that looked part radio telescope and part sculpture. It was beautiful in the way that only functional things could be beautiful. Pete sat down at his main console and began the startup sequence he had performed thousands of times. Each switch had to be thrown in the right order. Each system had to come online at exactly the right moment. One mistake could damage equipment that had taken him years to build and decades to perfect. The screens flickered to life, showing readouts that would have meant nothing to most people. To Pete, they were as familiar as his own heartbeat. Power levels, frequency ranges, signal strength, background radiation. Everything looked normal. Everything was ready. He opened a worn notebook and began to write. The pages were filled with similar entries, one for each night over the past 30 years. The handwriting had changed over the decades, growing shakier as arthritis crept into his fingers, but the message was always the same. "This is Dr. Peter Garrison of Earth," he spoke into the microphone. "Sol system, third planet. I am transmitting on multiple frequencies in the hope that someone, somewhere, might be listening." Pete had been Dr. Peter Garrison once. That felt like a lifetime ago now. Back in 1975, he had been one of NASA's brightest young engineers. He had worked on the Voyager program, designing communication systems that could still talk to Earth from the edge of the solar system. He had helped plan missions to Mars that never happened, space stations that were never built, dreams that died in budget meetings and political fights. The project that ended his career was called Deep Reach. It was supposed to be humanity's first serious attempt at interstellar communication. Not the simple radio signals that SETI sent out, but something more sophisticated. Something that could actually carry on a conversation across the vast distances between stars. Pete had spent 3 years designing the perfect system. It used principles that wouldn't be discovered by mainstream science for another decade. He had been ahead of his time, too far ahead. When the funding dried up in 1978, Deep Reach was canceled. The equipment was supposed to be destroyed, but Pete had other plans. He stole it. All of it, piece by piece. Over the course of 6 months, he smuggled the components out of the facility. He told himself he was saving humanity's future. His supervisors called it treason when they found out. The FBI called it theft of government property. Pete called it the most important thing he had ever done. The official story was that Dr. Peter Garrison had suffered a nervous breakdown and quietly resigned from NASA. The real story was that he had vanished one night, taking with him the secrets of interstellar communication and the hardware to make it work. He had driven for 3 days before he found this place. A small town where nobody asked too many questions, where a man could set up shop as a mechanic and disappear into ordinary life. He bought the garage with cash and never looked back, but he never stopped working. Every night for 30 years, Pete had sent his messages into the darkness between stars. Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, pictures encoded as radio waves. The story of humanity told in ones and zeros, broadcast to whoever might be listening. Martha had been the only person who knew the truth. She had met him 2 years after he came to town, when he was still jumping at shadows and checking over his shoulder for government agents. She saw through his cover story immediately, but never pressed him for details. It took him 5 years to trust her enough to show her the basement, and another 5 before he told her everything. She never called him crazy. She never asked him to stop. Instead, she brought him coffee during his long nights at the radio, helped him order parts through shell companies, and listened when he explained his latest modifications to the transmission array. When he grew discouraged, she reminded him that Columbus sailed for months before finding land. What if no one's out there? He had asked her once, during a particularly dark period. "Then we'll be the first," she had replied. "And someday, when humanity reaches the stars, they'll know that Pete Garrison was already trying to say hello." Martha had been dead for 3 years now, but Pete still heard her voice encouraging him. Still felt her presence in the basement laboratory where they had spent so many nights together, reaching toward infinity. The transmission system finished its startup cycle. Pete looked at the status display and felt the familiar surge of hope and fear that came with each broadcast. Tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was meeting Keanu, seeing the genuine interest in the young man's eyes when Pete mentioned his dreams about contact with other worlds. Maybe it was just an old man's imagination. He began tonight's message the same way he always did. This is Dr. Peter Garrison of Earth, Sol System, Third Planet. I am transmitting on multiple frequencies in the hope that someone, somewhere, might be listening. Then he told them about his day, about the storm and the broken car and the actor who had been kind enough to listen to an old man's dreams. He told them about Martha and how much he missed her. He told them about humanity's hopes and fears, about the beauty of rain on a quiet road and the loneliness of searching for friends among the stars. Pete spoke for over an hour, pouring his heart into the darkness. When he finished, he began the listening cycle. For the next 6 hours, until dawn broke over the small town, he would scan the frequencies and wait for an answer that never came. But tonight felt different. As Pete adjusted the receivers and settled in for another long watch, he allowed himself to believe that somewhere in the vast cosmos, someone was finally listening. Someone was getting ready to answer. Someone was about to change everything. He didn't know how right he was. 7 days had passed since the storm, but Keanu could not stop thinking about the old mechanic. He had tried to put Pete Garrison out of his mind, but something about that night kept pulling at him. The way Pete had opened his door without question. The gentleness in his weathered hands as he worked on the engine. The sadness in his voice when he talked about his wife and his dreams of the stars. Keanu sat in his Los Angeles apartment, staring out at the city lights. He had everything a person could want, but he felt empty. The memory of Pete's simple kindness had shown him something he had been missing. Real human connection. Real purpose beyond fame and money. He picked up his phone and called Danny Morrison. Danny was a documentary filmmaker who specialized in finding extraordinary stories in ordinary places. If anyone would understand why this mattered, it would be Danny. "You want to drive 3 hours to interview a mechanic?" Danny asked when Keanu explained his idea. "He's not just a mechanic," Keanu said. "There's something special about him. Something important." Danny was quiet for a moment. "You know what? Fine, I trust your instincts, but I'm bringing Lisa too. She's got a good eye for these human interest stories." Lisa Chun was a technology journalist who wrote about how innovation changed people's lives. She was smart, curious, and never afraid to ask the hard questions that others avoided. If Pete had a story worth telling, Lisa would find it. They drove out to Pete's garage on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was shining, and the storm from the week before felt like something that had happened in a different world. The garage looked smaller in daylight, more weathered, but somehow more real too. Pete was under the hood of an old pickup truck. When they arrived, he looked up as they got out of their car, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw Keanu. "Well, I'll be," Pete said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." "How's the Mustang running?" "Like a dream," Keanu said. "Pete, I'd like you to meet my friends. This is Danny Morrison and Lisa Chun." Pete shook their hands with the same gentle strength Keanu remembered, always happy to meet friends of Keanu's. "What brings you folks out this way?" Danny explained their idea about documenting Pete's story, about showing the world that there were still people who helped strangers without expecting anything in return. Pete listened politely, but Keanu could see something flickering in the old man's eyes. Excitement, maybe, or nervousness. "I don't know about all that," Pete said finally. "I'm just a mechanic. Not much interesting about fixing cars." But Lisa had been watching Pete carefully while Danny talked. She noticed things that others missed. The way Pete's hands trembled slightly, not from age but from some kind of suppressed energy. The way his eyes kept drifting to an old radio in the corner of the garage. The way he seemed to be listening for something that wasn't there. "Mr. Garrison," Lisa said gently, "you don't seem like just a mechanic to me." Pete's smile faltered for just a moment. What do you mean by that? The way you diagnosed Keanu's car problem. The precision of your work. The equipment in here. Lisa gestured around the garage. Some of this stuff is pretty sophisticated for a small-town auto shop. Pete was quiet for a long moment. The radio in the corner crackled with static, and he glanced at it quickly before looking back at his visitors. I used to do other work, he said finally, before I came here. Technical work. What kind of technical work? Danny asked his filmmaker. Instinct sensing a deeper story, Pete looked at each of them in turn. Keanu saw something in the old man's face that he had not seen that stormy night. Fear, maybe, or hope, or both. If I tell you, Pete said slowly, you have to promise me something. You have to promise that you'll listen to the whole story before you decide I'm crazy. They all nodded, and Pete gestured for them to sit down. On some old crates he kept around for customers. The radio crackled again, and this time Pete did not try to hide his reaction. He stood up and walked over to it, adjusting the dial with practiced movements. The static cleared, and they could hear something underneath it. Not music or voices, but a pattern. A rhythm that sounded almost like Morse code, but more complex. More intentional. That's not a regular radio station, Lisa said. No, Pete said quietly. It's not. He turned back to face them, and Keanu saw that the old man had made some kind of decision. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by something else now. Relief, maybe. The relief of someone who had been carrying this secret for too long. I need to show you something, Pete said. But first, I need to know that I can trust you, all of you. You can trust us, Keanu said without hesitation. Pete studied their faces for a long moment, then nodded. All right then. Follow me. He led them to the back of the garage, to a canvas tarp that covered something against the wall. Pete pulled the tarp aside, revealing a metal door that looked completely out of place in the old building. What is that? Danny asked. The reason I've been living in this little town for 30 years, Pete said. He pressed his thumb against a small scanner, and the door opened with a soft hiss. The reason I became a mechanic instead of staying in my real job. And the reason that radio has been making those sounds for the past 3 days. The stairs leading down were narrow and dark. Pete flicked on a light switch, and they could see the steps disappearing into the basement below. 3 days ago, Pete said, his voice barely above a whisper, I got an answer. An answer to what? Lisa asked. Pete looked at her with eyes that held 30 years of hope and loneliness and desperate faith. To the question I've been asking the universe every night since 1978, he said. The question of whether we're alone out here. The radio upstairs crackled again, and the pattern of sound seemed more urgent now, more insistent, like someone far away was trying very hard to be heard. They're not random, Pete said, gesturing toward the ceiling. The sounds. They're mathematical. They're intelligent, and they're getting stronger every day. He started down the stairs, and after a moment of stunned silence, the others followed. Keanu felt like he was walking into a dream, or maybe into the most important moment of his life. Either way, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. Again, the basement opened up before them, filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Computers hummed quietly in the dim light. Cables snaked along the walls. And in the center of it all stood something that took Keanu's breath away. Welcome, Pete said, to humanity's first contact with the stars. The basement was like stepping into another world. Keanu, Danny, and Lisa stood at the bottom of the stairs, their mouths open in amazement. The room was bigger than the garage above, stretching back into shadows filled with blinking lights and humming machines. Pete moved between the equipment with the confidence of someone who had built every piece himself. He flipped switches and adjusted dials, bringing the systems online one by one. The air filled with the soft electronic sounds of computers waking up. This is impossible, Lisa whispered. How did you build all this? 30 years of work, Pete said without looking up from his console. 30 years of saving every penny, ordering parts from different companies so no one would ask questions, and putting it all together piece by piece. Danny was filming everything with his camera, but his hands were shaking. "Pete, what exactly is this place?" "It's a communication array," Pete said. "Designed to send and receive signals across interstellar distances. I built it based on research I did for NASA back in the 70s. You worked for NASA?" Keanu asked. Pete nodded. "Dr. Peter Garrison, aerospace engineer. I was part of a classified project called Deep Reach. We were trying to make real contact with intelligent life in other star systems." The main screen flickered to life, showing a complex display of wave patterns and frequency readings. Pete sat down at the console and began typing commands into the computer. "The project was canceled in 1978, Pete continued. "Budget cuts, political pressure, the usual reasons good science gets killed. But I believe the work was too important to stop." "So you stole it," Lisa said. "It was not a question." "I saved it," Pete corrected gently. "And I've been improving it ever since." He finished his startup sequence and turned to face them. "For 30 years, I've been sending messages into space, every night without fail. Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, pictures, music, stories about humanity. Everything I could think of that might interest an alien intelligence." "And no one ever answered," Danny said. Pete smiled. "That's where you're wrong." He turned back to the console and pressed a button. The speakers filled with the same rhythmic pattern they had heard upstairs, but clearer now, more complex. It sounded almost like music, but unlike any music made on Earth. "This started 3 days ago," Pete said. "Right after I told them about meeting Keanu." "You told them about me?" Keanu asked. "I tell them about everything," Pete said. "Every person I meet, every act of kindness I see, every reason to believe that humanity is worth knowing. That night you came to my garage, I described our whole conversation. How you walked through the rain, how grateful you were for help, how you listened to an old man's dreams without laughing." The signal from the speakers changed, becoming more urgent. Pete's fingers flew over the keyboard, and numbers began scrolling across the screen. "They're using mathematics," Pete explained. "Universal language. 2 + 2 = 4, no matter what planet you're from." Lisa leaned closer to the screen. "What are they saying?" "They've been teaching me their number system," Pete said. "Showing me how they count, how they measure time and distance. But today, they sent something different." He pulled up another screen, this one showing a series of simple drawings made from dots and lines. The first looked like a circle with lines radiating from it. The second showed the same circle with smaller circles around it. "A star," Keanu sighed. "And planets." "Exactly," Pete said. "They're showing me their solar system. 8 planets, just like ours used to be before we reclassified Pluto." The next image showed a single planet with what looked like continents and oceans. Then came pictures that looked like cities, tall structures reaching toward the sky. "They're not from one world," Pete said, his voice filled with wonder. "Look at this." The screen filled with dozens of different planetary images. Desert worlds, ocean worlds, worlds covered in what looked like crystal forests. Each one had the same kind of structures, the same signs of intelligent life. "It's not one species," Pete said. "It's a whole community. A federation of different worlds working together." Danny lowered his camera. "How many of them are there?" Pete scrolled through more images. "I count at least 20 different star systems, maybe more. They call themselves the Harmony Collective." "How do you know what they call themselves?" Lisa asked. Pete pointed to a series of symbols on the screen. "They've been teaching me their language. Simple concepts at first, then more complex ideas. The word harmony keeps appearing in their messages, always connected to images of different species working together. The signal changed again, and new images appeared. These showed what looked like spacecraft, sleek vessels moving between the stars. Then came images of beings that were clearly not human. Some were tall and thin, others short and broad. Some seemed to be made of crystal, others looked like they might be energy beings. "They're beautiful," Keanu said softly. "And they're peaceful," Pete added. "Every image they send shows cooperation, art, science used to help rather than harm. They've been watching us, learning about us, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Danny asked. "For us to be ready," Pete said. "For humanity to grow up enough to join them." The speakers crackled, and a new series of signals began. Pete leaned forward, studying the patterns intently. "This is new," he said. "They're sending something they've never sent before." The screen, filled with images of Earth, not satellite photos, but pictures that could only have been taken from space by someone watching. The continents were clearly visible, the swirl of clouds, the blue of the oceans. "They've been here," Lisa said. "Not here," Pete corrected. "Watching from a distance. Learning about us the same way we learn about them." The next images showed human cities, human faces, human activities. People helping each other during disasters. Scientists working together on complex problems. Artists creating beauty for its own sake. "They're not interested in our weapons or our wars," Pete said. "Look at what they focus on." Every image showed the best of humanity. Teachers with students, doctors healing the sick, parents caring for children, people of different races and cultures working side by side. "They've been testing us," Pete realized. "All these years, they've been watching to see what kind of species we really are." The final image made them all gasp. It showed Pete's garage on the night of the storm. There was Keanu walking through the rain, and there was Pete opening the door to help a stranger. "That's when they decided," Pete said, his voice barely a whisper. "That night, when you needed help and I gave it freely, that's when they knew humanity was ready." The signal changed one final time, and words appeared on the screen. Not alien symbols, but English letters. "Hello, Pete Garrison of Earth. We would like to be friends." Pete stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly reached for his microphone. "Hello," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We would like to be friends too." The words on the screen glowed like stars against the darkness. "Hello, Pete Garrison of Earth. We would like to be friends." For a moment, nobody in the basement moved or spoke. The weight of the moment pressed down on them like a physical thing. Pete's hands trembled as he reached for the microphone. 30 years of broadcasting into empty space, 30 years of hoping and waiting, had led to this single moment. He cleared his throat and spoke. "Hello to you too," he said simply. "My name is Pete, and these are my friends Keanu, Danny, and Lisa. We are honored to meet you." The response came quickly, the alien text flowing across the screen faster than before. "We know of Keanu Reeves. We have watched his moving pictures. He shows kindness in dark times. This is why we chose to answer you when he came to your place of work." Keanu stepped closer to the microphone. "You've been watching our movies? We have studied all of your broadcast signals for many years. Your entertainment shows you who you really are. Keanu Reeves plays heroes who protect the weak. This tells you us about human values." Lisa pulled out a notebook and began writing furiously. As a journalist, she understood that this was the biggest story in human history. But as a person, she was simply amazed. "Why now?" she asked. "Why did you decide to make contact now?" The answer took longer to come, as if the beings on the other end were choosing their words carefully. "We are called the Harmony Collective. We are 23 different species from 17 star systems. We have been friends for over 4,000 of your years. We search for new friends who share our values." "What values?" Danny asked. "Peace, cooperation, kindness to strangers, protection of the weak, sharing of knowledge, respect for all life. Pete wiped tears from his eyes. And you think humanity shares these values? Not all humans, but enough. We have watched your species for 300 years. We saw your wars, your cruelty, your destruction of your own world. We almost decided you were not ready. What changed your minds? Keanu asked. We also saw your kindness, your doctors who heal without payment, your teachers who work for little money to help children learn, your artists who create beauty to share with others, your ordinary people who help strangers in need. The screen showed new images. Doctors working in disaster zones, teachers in poor schools, musicians playing for free in hospitals, people helping neighbors during floods and earthquakes. We needed to test whether these good humans represented your true nature. So we watched for examples of pure kindness, help given with nitrogen monoxide, expectation of reward. The night I met Pete, Keanu said quietly. Yes, Pete Garrison opened his door to a stranger in a storm. He worked late to fix your vehicle. He refused payment. He shared his dreams with you. And you, Keanu Reeves, listened with respect to an old man's hopes for the stars. Pete laughed through his tears. All this time, I thought I was just talking to empty space. You were never talking to empty space. Pete Garrison, we have heard every message you sent for 30 years. Your words about human kindness, your stories of love and loss, your hope for contact with other worlds. You showed you as the best of humanity. Danny looked up from his camera. What happens now? Now we begin to share, but slowly, carefully. Your species is not ready for open contact. Many humans would react with fear and violence. We must start with individuals who understand the importance of peace. What kind of sharing? Lisa asked. Knowledge, technology, wisdom. We will teach you things that will help your species and your world. Clean energy that will stop the warming of your planet. Medicine that will cure your diseases. Ways to grow food without harming your environment. Pete leaned forward. Why would you give us all this? Because when species work together, all benefit. We learned this long ago. The Harmony Collective is strong because we share everything. Knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. The screen filled with diagrams and equations. Even though none of them were scientists, they could see that this was technology far beyond anything on Earth. Start with these designs, the message continued. Pete Garrison will build the first devices. They are simple but powerful. They will generate energy from sunlight more efficiently than any human technology. Why Pete? Keanu asked. Pete Garrison has proven his character over 30 years. He seeks knowledge not for power or wealth, but to help others. He will use these gifts wisely. Pete studied the diagrams on the screen. Even with his engineering background, much of it was beyond his understanding. But some parts looked familiar, like advanced versions of technologies he had worked with at NASA. I'll need help, he said. This is too big for one person. You will have help, we will guide you, and you have friends. The screen showed images of Keanu, Danny, and Lisa. They will help you share these gifts with your species. How do we do that without causing panic? Danny asked. Slowly, carefully, Pete Garrison will patent these designs as his own inventions. He will sell them to companies that will use them to help people. The world will think he is simply a brilliant inventor. Lisa looked up from her notes. And the money from these patents will be used to help others. Pete Garrison does not seek wealth. He seeks to make his world better. The alien communication continued for another hour. They explained their society, their history, their hopes for humanity's future. They spoke of other young species they had helped over the centuries, planets that had gone from war and destruction to peace and prosperity. Your species has great potential, they said. You are curious, creative, and capable of great love. With guidance, humanity could become a valuable member of the galactic community. How long will it take? Keanu asked. Perhaps 100 of your years. maybe less if humans learn quickly. We will start with technology to heal your world. Then, we will teach you to reach the stars." As the conversation wound down, Pete felt a peace he had not known since Martha died. His life's work had not been in vain. His dreams were coming true, not just for him, but for all humanity. "Thank you, Pete Garrison," the final message read. "Thank you for never giving up hope. Thank you for showing you the good heart of humanity. Together, we will build a better future." Pete looked at his three companions, seeing the same wonder and determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. "Well," he said softly, "I guess we have work to do." 6 months later, Pete Garrison stood in his garage, but it looked nothing like it had before. The old tools were still there, and he still fixed cars for his neighbors, but now there was something else. In the corner where the old radio used to sit, a sleek device hummed quietly. It looked like a small refrigerator, but it was generating enough clean energy to power the entire town. The first prototype had taken Pete 3 months to build, following the alien blueprints. The Harmony Collective had guided him every step of the way, explaining each component through their nightly communications. When he finally switched it on and watched the power meters climb, Pete had felt like he was holding magic in his hands. Patent applications had gone through faster than anyone expected. Pete's lawyer, a young woman named Amy Foster from the nearby city, had been amazed by the elegance of the designs. She did not ask where Pete had learned to build such advanced technology. She just helped him protect his inventions and find companies willing to pay for them. The first sale had been to a solar panel manufacturer in California. They had paid Pete $2 million for the rights to use his improved photovoltaic design. The second sale went to a battery company that wanted his energy storage system. By the end of the month, Pete had more money than he knew what to do with. He kept none of it for himself. Keanu walked into the garage carrying 2 cups of coffee. Over the past 6 months, he had become a regular visitor. Sometimes he came alone. Sometimes with Danny and Lisa. They had all sworn to keep Pete's secret, and they had all found ways to help with the work. "The Anderson family's power bill came in today," Keanu said, handing Pete one of the cups. $15 for the whole month. Pete smiled. The Andersons lived next door to the garage. They had been the first family to receive one of Pete's small home energy units, supposedly as a test of his new invention. Their electricity bill had dropped from $200 a month to almost nothing. "That's the point," Pete said. "People shouldn't have to choose between heating their homes and buying food for their kids." Over the past 6 months, Pete had quietly installed his energy devices in dozens of homes around town. He told people he was testing his inventions and needed volunteers. The devices were free, and so was the installation. All he asked was that they keep quiet about it until he was ready to announce his breakthrough to the world. The real announcement would never come. Of course, Pete was content to let the world think he was just a brilliant mechanic who had stumbled onto some revolutionary ideas. The truth was far more complicated and far more wonderful. Danny pushed through the front door, his camera bag slung over his shoulder. He had been documenting everything, creating a record of humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. The footage would never be shown to the public, but someday, when the world was ready, it might help people understand how it all began. "The kids are here," Danny announced. Through the window, Pete could see a yellow school bus pulling up outside. Twice a week, Pete taught a workshop for local teenagers who were interested in mechanics and engineering. What had started as a way to give back to the community had become something much more important. The kids filed into the garage, their faces bright with curiosity. There was Jake Williams, whose father had lost his job at the factory. Maria Gonzalez, whose family had moved here from Mexico looking for a better life. Tony Chang, whose parents ran the Chinese restaurant in town. Kids from every background, united by their desire to learn. "Afternoon, Mr. Pete," they called out as they gathered around his workbench. "Afternoon, kids," Pete replied. "Today we're going to learn about energy conversion. Who can tell me what energy is?" As the lesson began, Pete caught Keanu's eye and smiled. This was what the Harmony Collective had really given him. Not just advanced technology, but a purpose that went beyond himself. These kids would grow up to be engineers and scientists. And inventors. They would build the future that Pete could only dream of. Lisa arrived just as the workshop was ending. She had been busy all day, working on the foundation that Pete had established with his patent money. The Pete Garrison Foundation provided free technical training to anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of their background or ability to pay. It also funded research into clean energy and sustainable technology at universities around the world. The MIT proposal came back approved, Lisa told Pete as the kids headed back to their bus. "Full funding for the fusion research project," Pete nodded. The fusion project was one of several that the foundation supported. The scientists working on it had no idea that their funding came from alien technology patents. They just knew that. Someone believed in their work enough to pay for it. That evening, after the garage had closed and the visitors had gone home, Pete made his way down to the basement. The communication array had grown more sophisticated over the months. The Harmony Collective had taught him to build better receivers, more powerful transmitters, and computers that could translate their language in real time. "Good evening, friends," Pete said into the microphone as he did every night. "Good evening, Pete Garrison," came the reply, appearing as text on his screen. "How goes the sharing of gifts?" "Better than I hoped," Pete said. "The energy devices are working perfectly. The kids in my workshop are learning fast. The foundation funded 3 new research projects this week." "Excellent. Your species learns quickly when given the chance." Pete settled into his chair for the nightly conversation that had become the highlight of his day. Over the months, he had come to think of the Harmony Collective not as distant aliens, but as friends. They shared stories of their own worlds, their own struggles to build peaceful societies, their own hopes for the future. "I have news," Pete said. "Keanu wants to expand the workshop program. He thinks we should open schools in other towns." "Keanu Reeves continues to show wisdom. This is good. The more humans who learn to build rather than destroy, the faster your species will be ready for the stars." "How will we know when we're ready?" Pete asked. "When acts of kindness outnumber acts of cruelty. When sharing becomes more common than hoarding. When humans think of themselves as one species rather than many tribes." Pete looked around his basement laboratory at the machines that connected him to friends among the stars, at the evidence of humanity's first steps toward a larger community. It would take time, maybe generations, but he could see it happening. One small kindness at a time, one shared invention at a time, one young mind inspired at a time. "We'll get there," Pete said quietly. "We know you will, Pete Garrison, and we'll be here to help, as friends should." Above them, in the garage where it all began, the coffee pot still sat on Pete's workbench. Tomorrow there would be more cars to fix, more kids to teach, more ways to share the gifts that had fallen from the stars into the hands of an old mechanic who had never stopped believing in the goodness of humanity. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but the greatest wonder of all was right here on Earth. The endless capacity of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when they opened their hearts to strangers and their minds to possibilities beyond their dreams.